Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Poetry 1, course code 403, lecture 24. In earlier lectures, we have discussed John Donne as a most representative metaphysical poet. He wrote love songs, elegies, hymns, holy sonnets. So he is one of the most representative of the metaphysical poets. The other contemporaries of John Donne were George Herbert, Richard Crashaw, and Henry Vaughan. There were certain characteristics of metaphysical poetry, not only metaphysical poetry, even the prose of those days that had certain characteristics, and these were metaphysical in nature. These writers used the far-fetched ideas. So these, let's discuss these one by one. There was a dazzling wordplay. They were explicitly sexual. There was the use of paradoxes and oxymorons in their poetry. Subtle argumentation was there. Surprising contrasts were there. Then intricate psychological analysis. They presented the feelings and emotions in a very complex manner. Then another characteristic was striking imagery. They used imagery from all the practical fields of life, including medicine, mathematics, surgery. So all these fields were included in order to bring in the imagery and comparisons. Then far-fetched ideas were used. Full of the poetry was full of logic and reasoning. Heterogeneous ideas were combined together. Heterogeneous refers to the different types, the varied types of the ideas. So all those varied types of ideas were combined together. Then the themes like love were experimented like science in the laboratory. Talking about John Donne's poetry, we have earlier discussed two of his love songs. So we will have a recap of all these characteristic features so that they are refreshed. He used the subject matters that in his poetry, they were the kind of subject matters that Donne used in his poetry were secular and religious in nature, in contrast to the patriarchal love doctrine of the time. So he rebelled against the set tradition of the time, and he did not use it, or the way he treated love, it was not same as it existed before him. He wrote songs, sonnets, divine poems, elegies, satires, verse letters, and historical epistles. His poetical works are unmatchable in the history of English literature for their comparisons, for their far-fetched ideas. So those characteristics that are associated with the metaphysical school of thought, for all those characteristics, his poetical works are unsurpassable, matchless हैं. वो कभी किसी era में किसी और poet की writing के साथ compare नहीं किए जा सकते हैं. And that is the reason he is one of the most representative of the metaphysical poets. Then his poetical works are tedious. They are strange. अजीबो-गरीब उसमें वो comparisons present करता है, जो कि हर field से हो सकते हैं. वो सिर्फ emotions और feelings पे base नहीं करता. Then wire drawn in their logic. So his poetical works are wire drawn in the logic. हर उसके कॉर्नर्स में जाके उसने जो है उसमें से लॉजिक निकालने की, लॉजिक और रीजनिंग निकालकर उसकी बेसिस पे कंपैरिजन प्रेजेंट किए हैं, और दोनों चीज़ों को लॉजिक की बेसिस पे दो कंपैरिजन्स को उसने अपने थीमेटिक पर्पस के लिए यूज किया है. देन हिज पोएटिकल वर्क्स आर टिपिकल ऑफ क्रॉस ग्रेन्ड एंड दे आर हार्ड टू डील विद. Then his poetical works are typical of mathematical imagery. He uses the images like compass. He compares the two lovers with the two parts of the compass that are combined together in one of the corner, and in the other corner, and at the other end there are two parts. Then his poetical works are unconventional. They use unconventional analogies and comparisons. As far as his imagery is concerned, he uses imagery from circles, maps, and engravings, and we will see this in today's lecture also. In today's poems, once again, we will find the use of these imagery from these various topics. That include circles, maps, engravings, elephants, fleas, whales, and new discoveries. Element of humanism, he embodied some part or some elements of humanism in his poetry, but he rebelled against some of the set traditions. कुछ चीज़ें उसमें वही थी, कुछ एलिमेंट्स जो उसकी एज की जो कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स थी उसमें पाए जाते थे, जैसे कि वॉयजेस ऑफ डिस्कवरी थे, ये हंगर फॉर नॉलेज था, दीज वी फाइंड इन हिज पोइट्री ऑल्सो, लेकिन उसका ट्रीटमेंट थोड़ा सा डिफरेंट है. दैट इज द रीजन ही स्टैंड आउट एज द representative of the metaphysical poets, not as the representative of the Elizabethan poets. So there are certain factors that he has taken, he has been influenced by his age, and some other characteristics he molded them the way he liked. He exhibits hunger for knowledge, a search for knowledge in his poems, and there is a thirst for unraveling the mystery of his existence. He wanted to find out the mystery of existence, the mystery of truth. As we have earlier discussed, his poems Go and Catch a Falling Star and Love's Alchemy. In Love's Alchemy, he wanted to find out the truth. There was a quest for truth, and he in the end mentioned that it is not possible to find that true love. Probably some critics believe that it was a reference to spiritual love, because that spiritual love we cannot reach in this world. So his attitude towards love was different. It was unconventional. He treated love differently as compared to his contemporaries. Then he differed from Elizabethan love poetry, and he rejected. How did he differ from the Elizabethan love poetry? His treatment of love was different. He considered the beloved as a person having some of the flaws also in the personality. He did not consider the beloved as a deity or a goddess. So he rejected the lofty cult of women, and he claimed that these women who are beloveds, they are not no deity or they are no goddesses. He challenged the conventions, and for him the true love was the merger of the souls. In two bodies there was one soul. The type of themes that he used in his poems, they were lovers as microcosm. Since one of the spirit of Renaissance was that man is the center of universe, the way he has presented the world in his poems, in his poetry, is he has presented the microcosm of the world, that the world of lovers represents the whole of the world. He has used the Neoplatonic concept of love in his poems, that it moves in a hierarchical order. First you are attracted by the beauty of one single person, and then that beauty, that admiration for a single person leads you to admire many beautiful people. Then eventually you start appreciating the beautiful minds, and that leads you to admire, to appreciate the beauty in general. So this is the Neoplatonic concept of love. Then religious enlightenment is also used in his poems as the physical delight, and then quest for one true religion is also prevalent in his poems. The images that he uses in his poetry are of spheres, and in spheres there is an infinite association, there is a near infinite association. He uses conceits that are far-fetched. ऐसे comparisons उसने present किए हैं जो कि आम तौर पे use नहीं होते हैं. Thematic connections, now those conceits, they have been brought together through thematic connections. जैसा कि हमने पहले भी बात की कि वो डिफरेंट फील्ड से इमेजेस यूज करता है. अब जब वो मैथ्स या मेडिसिन से या एल्केमी से जब वो इमेज लेकर, जो मेटाफर लेकर वो जो कंपैरिजन है उसको थीम के जरिए कनेक्ट करता है. सो ही accomplishes his task by comparing the two unlike things through the thematic connections. Then the discovery and conquest is another image used in his poetry, through which he signifies the mystery and magnificence of the discovery of the voyages of these journeys. Then reflections are often presented in his poetry. There are reflections of eyes and ears. For example, in his poem A Valediction of Weeping, he presents the image of tears and eyes in that poem. And even the sun rising, he presents the image of the eyes. In lecture 23 we discussed, so these were all the characteristic features of John Donne's poems. Now in lecture 23 we had discussed Go and Catch a Falling Star, and this poem revolved around the theme of finding a perfect woman, finding a sincere, loyal and beautiful woman in this world. And the poet compared this task of finding a loyal and beautiful woman to some impossible tasks, and he said that it is probably possible to accomplish all those tasks as compared to find a loyal and sincere and beautiful woman in this world. Finally, he said that even if you spend all your life searching for a beautiful and pious, chaste woman, even if you find any, by the time you are going to report it to the poet, or by the time you write a letter to the poet, she will not be sincere, she will be dishonest. Then the second point that we earlier discussed was Love's Alchemy. In Love's Alchemy, the basic theme revolves around the mystery of finding true love. The poet is of the point of view that true love does not exist in this world, and he compared finding true love or discovering true love in this world to the works of alchemists who were busy or who were trying to convert the baser metals into gold. Now these alchemists, they had spent all their life searching for the or looking for the appropriate components to turn the baser metals into gold. इन एल्केमिस्ट ने अपनी तमाम जिंदगी सर्व कर दी थी ताकि वो उस कंपाउंड को दरियाफ्त कर सकें कि जिसकी मदद से ये जो लोहा या तांबा वगैरह है इसको सोने में तब्दील कर सकें. So that was a trend of that time, but all these attempts were useless. ये तमाम कोशिशें बेसूद थीं, इनसे कभी कुछ हासिल नहीं हुआ था, and nobody was ever able to discover any such thing. फिर इसमें और different references, comparisons poet ने use किए हैं, कुछ contrasts use किए हैं. Then finally the basic theme was that it is impossible to find true love in this world, and even once again he ridicules, he mocks the women. He says that by the end, he says that if a woman in whom men try to find out true love, they do not possess any intellect, they do not possess any mind, and they are like mummies who are devoid of any brain, any mind, any logical thinking. So these are the two poems that we had discussed earlier in Go and Catch a Falling Star, and the other is Love's Alchemy. Today we are going to, the other two poems that we are going to talk about today are The Sun Rising and A Valediction of Weeping. We will analyze these poems and we will trace out the metaphysical features in these poems. First we will begin with The Sun Rising, first stanza of the poem. Let's have a layout of the stanza. Busy old fool, unruly sun, why dost thou thus, through windows and through curtains, call on us? Must to thy motions lovers' seasons run? Saucy pedantic wretch, go chide late school boys and sour prentices. Go tell court huntsmen that the king will ride. Call country ants to have us offices. Love all alike. No season knows nor clime, nor hours, days, months, which are the rags of time. If we look at the rhyme scheme of this stanza, the first line ends with the word sun, so it's A. Thus, it does not rhyme with the first line, so this is B. Us and thus, they rhyme together, so us is again B. So the rhyme scheme so far is A, B, B. The fourth line ends with run. Run rhymes with the first line, sun. So the same letter of alphabet is designated to this line. So the rhyme scheme of the first four lines will become A, B, B, A. Then chide. Chide does not rhyme with any of the words previously said. So this is C. Prentices, D. Ride and chide rhyme together. So once again C. Prentices and offices. So once again it rhymes D. Climb and time, they rhyme together, so this is E. So the rhyme scheme will be A, B, B, A, C, D, C, D, E, E. So this is the rhyme scheme of the poem The Sun Rising. Let's have a look at the layout of the poem. There are 3 stanzas in the poem. Each stanza consists of 10 lines, and the rhyme scheme, as we have just discussed, the rhyme scheme of the poem is A, B, B, A, C, D, C, D, E, E. So in these 10 lines, this is the rhyme scheme, and different meters, the poet has used different meters in different lines. In lines 1, 5 and 6, iambic tetrameter is used. Tetra means 4. So there are 8 syllables in line 1, 5 and 6. Tetra means 4. In line 2 there is diameter used. Dia means 2. So there are 4 syllables in there are 2 feet used in line 2. Lines 3, 4, 7, 8, 9 and 10, pentameter is used. That means 5 feet are used. That refers to the use of 10 syllables. So in different lines, the poet has used different meters, but in all the stanzas, there is a consistency. In every stanza, line 1, 5 and 6 carries, or it is written in iambic tetrameter. Line 2 in 3 of the stanzas is written in diameter. Line 3, 4, 7, 8, 9 and 10 is written in pentameter in all 3 stanzas. Busy old fool, unruly sun, why dost thou thus through windows and through curtains call on us? Now the poet is addressing sun, so he is personifying sun as if it is a living being. He says that you are wild, you are untamed sun, somebody who cannot be tamed, somebody who does not know any rules. So he says that busy old fool. He is saying that it is your work, you are always busy and you are so old enough that, and you are fool enough that you are disturbing us. Why dost thou thus? Why are you doing this? Why are you disturbing us? Through windows and through curtains. Through the windows, and so the speaker in this poem is probably lying in his room, maybe in his bedroom, and he says that why are you disturbing us? Why are you calling on us? Why are you making us get up from this room? And he says that you are busy and you are old, and so you are such a fool enough that you are asking us, you are disturbing us through these windows and through these curtains. The poet has personified sun as if it was a living being. उसको वो qualities दी गई हैं, क्योंकि आमतौर पे sun को हम address नहीं कर सकते. जब हम किसी चीज़ को address करते हैं, that means we have given the qualities of human beings to that thing. So the sun has been personified here, personification use की है, और उसको unruly sun कहा है कि you are untamed. क्योंकि usually हम जब कोई पेट्स भी घर में रखते हैं, हम उनको टेम करते हैं, पहले हम उनको उनकी प्रॉपर ट्रेनिंग करते हैं, उसके बाद हम उनको रखते हैं. सो ही सेज दैट अनरूली, दैट यू आर वाइल्ड, ओके, तुमने, यू आर सो ओल्ड एंड यू आर सच अ फूल दैट even with your age you have not learnt any lessons. Must to thy motions lovers season run. He says that you should follow, why should the lovers follow this season that you announce for them? Means it's day or night time. That timing is not meant for the lovers. They have nothing to do with these seasons, with these times. They have got their own season. Saucy pedantic wretch, go chide. He is rebuking the sun, and he is giving it the title saucy pedantic wretch, that you do not have any sense, you are finicky, you are treating everybody in the same way. So he is rebuking it. He is asking him to go. Late school boys and sour apprentices, and he is asking it to go to the school boys who are late for their school. He says that don't disturb us here, don't disturb us, don't try to wake us up, and go to the school boys who are late for their school, and sour apprentices, and go to the worksmen who are late for their work. Go tell court huntsman, go and tell the huntsman of the court that the king will ride, that they should start their work. Tell them that king is coming and they should start their work. Call country ants to harvest offices, and ask the ants to harvest offices to start their toil, because ants are considered to be very hard working. So he is saying, he asks the sun to go and to ask the ants to start their work in the to start their work of harvesting, because the ants are considered to be very hard working, because they work day and night in order to collect food for the winter season. So he is asking the ants to start their work, to start their hard work. Then he says, love all alike, no season knows nor clime. He is using hyperbole here, which is exaggeration. He says that love knows no season, no climate. It is not bound. Love has no bound. It is not restricted by the seasons and climate, nor hours, days, month, which are the rags of time. So these are the bits of time. Love is not affected by this. So it does not matter whether it is morning or it is the daytime or it is the night time. Love does not know any climate, any season, any days of any time of the day, because those are the bits of time and they are useful only for the people who have to work, and it is not for the lovers. Thy beams so reverent and strong, why shouldest thou think? He addresses the sun. He says that why do you think that your rays, your beams are very strong and very powerful and they can disturb us? So he is directly addressing the sun, and he is saying that by pouring in through the windows and through the curtains, do you think that you are so powerful and strong that you can disturb us? He says that I could eclipse and cloud them with a wink. He says that I myself can eclipse and cloud these rays, the rays of the sun with a wink, but that I would not lose her sight so long. So here her refers to the beloved of the speaker. He says that I can eclipse and cloud these rays of yours, but I do not want to lose the sight of my beloved even for a second. So he says that even for that smallest time, I do not want to lose the sight of my beloved, so I do not want to even wink my eyes. If her eyes have not blinded thine, look and tomorrow late tell me. He says that there is such an energy, there is such brightness in the eyes of his beloved. He says that they are so bright and shining and glittering that if her eyes have not blinded your shine, if that brightness in her eyes and that glitter in her eyes, if that has not blinded your eyes, if it has not eclipsed your sun rays, look. He is commanding the sun, look, and tomorrow he is asking him to see around, and tomorrow late tell me, and tomorrow sometimes in the late hours report it to me whether both the Indias of spice and mine be where thou leftest them and lie here with me. He says that the spices, the treasures of India and my treasures, where thou you left us then, are they still at present at those treasures of India? They are still present at the same place where you left them yesterday, or lie here with me, or they are lying here with me in the bed. So once again he is using exaggeration in these lines by comparing the treasures of India, the treasures of East, to his beloved. He says he is asking the sun, if the sun's eyes have not been blinded by the brightness of his beloved's eyes, he says that if that has not happened, go and see around and look around the world, and tomorrow late come and sometimes tomorrow late come and report it to me that the spices, the treasures of India, those spices where you had left them earlier, are they still lying at the same place, or they are lying here with me in the bed? He is using the hyperbolic expression, he is using the exaggeration, the overstatement, and comparing the treasures of the East with his beloved. He says that since one of the characteristic feature of Renaissance was the microcosm of the world and the importance of man, so here again we find this element that he is comparing the treasures of the world with his beloved, and he says that वो जो तमाम कीमती चीज़ें जो ईस्ट में मौजूद हैं, क्या वो उसी जगह पर मौजूद हैं जहां पर कि तुमने उन्हें छोड़ा था? ही इज आस्किंग द सन, उससे कह रहा है कि जाओ और देखो और मुझे आकर बताओ कि क्या वो उसी जगह पर मौजूद हैं या वो मेरे साथ यहाँ पर हैं बेड में. सो ही इज कंपेयरिंग, ही इज यूजिंग द फिगर ऑफ स्पीच which is known as hyperbole. He is using hyperbole and he is making the comparison of his beloved to the treasures of east, and he says that those treasures, all those treasures, they are lying here with me in my bed. So first he had used personification, he has personified sun, he is addressing sun, and then he says that your beams are not very powerful and I can eclipse them, but I do not want to lose the sight of my beloved. So he says that if the eyes of my beloved, they are so bright and they are so shining. He says the eyes of my beloveds are so bright that if they do not blind your eyes, then look around the world and tomorrow, sometimes tomorrow, not early in the morning, sometimes tomorrow late, come and report it to me that all those treasures of India, where are they lying? Are they lying at the same place where you had left them, or are they lying here with me in the bed? Ask for those kings whom thou sawest yesterday, and thou shalt hear all here in one bed lay. So first he compared the beloved with the treasures of the east, and then he says that ask for those kings whom thou sawest yesterday, and all those kings whom you saw yesterday, and thou shalt hear, and you will hear then, all here in one bed lay. He is comparing himself with the kings. He says, I am the king. He is comparing himself with the kings and his beloved with the treasures, as the kings have the hold of all the treasures of the east. In the similar way, he is presenting a microcosm of the world in his bed. He says that this is the whole world in which I represent the kings, and who have got the authority or the control of the treasures, and those treasures are symbolic of his beloved, who is lying there or who is in his possession. She is all states and all princes I. Now he explicitly states what he was saying earlier, treasures in the form of his beloved and kings in the form of he himself. So the speaker here, he is metaphorically saying that she is all states, that his beloved represents all the states of the world, and all princes I, and I represent all the princes. Nothing else is. There is nothing else which is left in the world now. So he has metaphorically presented the world in the microcosmic form. Princes do but play us compared to this. All honor is mimic, all wealth alchemy. So he says that what do the princes do? They play us. And compared to this, as compared to this, whatever I will do, they play with us. And all honors mimic. All honor is, all respect is mimicry. It is imitation. And all wealth alchemy. So once again, in this poem he is using alchemy, the reference of alchemy, because there was nothing gained from those experiments of alchemy. वो useless experiments थे, उनसे कुछ भी हासिल नहीं हुआ था. So once again he says that all that honor that those prince and states and the kings they hold, that is mimicry, that is the imitation. वो fake है. और जो wealth है, that is all alchemy, because through alchemy these philosophers, these alchemists, they gained nothing. So all that wealth is nothing. So as compared to this, whatever I am having here, he first compares that, and then he says that all that respect, that honor of the kings, that is nothing as that is mimicry of my honor, and all those wealths, they are nothing as compared to the wealth that I have in my bed. So he considered his beloved to the most valuable treasure in this world. He says that there is nothing more. Even the treasures of the east are nothing in front of my beloved. That is nothing, absolutely nothing. That is a complete failure. कुछ भी नहीं है, उसकी अहमियत एक जर्रे जितनी भी नहीं है beloved के मुकाबले में. So these are the metaphoric expressions. He is comparing the beloved and himself with the kings and the treasures of the east. Thou son art half as happy as we. He addresses the son and he says that you are half happy than as compared to us, in that the worlds contracted thus. So he says that in us, in this, the world is contracted here. Thine age asks ease. He says that it is, ये तुम्हारी उम्र का तकाजा है. Remember at the beginning he said, he opened the poem, the poet opened the poem, busy old fool. So he says that you are old enough now, you have worked all your life, so thine age asks ease. कि अब ये तुम्हारी उम्र का तकाजा है. Your age does not permit you to go for more hard work now, and since thy duties be to warm the world, and he says that your duty is to warm the world, to throw light and to give warmth to the world. That is done in warming us. Since he had presented that microcosmic world in his bed, he says that this represents the whole earth, and I am the king, and I have got all the treasures here with me in my bed. He says that since your age, it asks for ease, your age requires ease now, you need to do some easy works. So since your duty, your work is to give warmth to the earth, that is done in warming us. Since he says that you have spread your beams on this in this room, on this bed, so you have done your duty by warming us. Shine here to us, and thou art everywhere. He addresses the sun and he says that shine here on us, that when you shine on us, that means you are shining everywhere, because he has considered that bed as the whole of universe, as the microcosm of the universe. He says that that if you shine on us, that means you are present everywhere. This bed thy center is. So this is the Renaissance element, that your center is this bed, these walls thy sphere, and the boundary of your work is of your the limit of your sun rays is this room. Thy walls, these walls, thy sphere, he says that this is your limit, that if you shine on this, you spread light and you give warmth to us, that means you have done your duty. Since you are old, and he has used the Renaissance element, and that ultimately leads to the metaphysical element, that the world is and has become anthropocentric during the Renaissance, that man is the center of universe. So man is the center of importance. So he says that this bed where I am lying, so this is the Renaissance element, but he further takes it to the limit, that he says that I in this room represent the whole world. I and my beloved present in this room represent the whole world. And when you shine on us, when you warm us, when you spread your sun rays on us, that in that way you have done all your duty of spreading light and giving warmth to the whole world. So with this we finish with the sun rising, which was an address to the sun. This poet personifies sun and he addresses it. He says that why are you disturbing here me and my beloved in this room, go and ask the people who have to do their work, ask the aunts or the school boys who are late for the school. He suggests them all these people who have to get up early in the morning, and then he refers, he uses the hyperbolic expression saying that love knows no season nor climate. He says that there is no season for love, no, not climate, not even the time. So he says that we are not bound by time, so go and ask them to ask the people to do their work. Later on he says that he compares the beloved with the treasures of the east, and he compares himself with the all the kings of the world, and he says that this room represents the microcosm, the world in a microcosm, and when the sun, since it is old and aged and now it is not capable of doing hard work of spreading light on all over the world, he says that it is I suggest you to shine on us here around this room and give us warmth and light, and in this way you will have performed your duty of giving warmth and light to all the world, because this room is a microcosm of the whole world. The next point that we have to discuss, that we will discuss today, is a valediction of weeping. Let's first have a look at the first stanza. Let me pour forth my tears before thy face, whilst I stay, for thy face coins them, and thy stamp they bear, and by this mintage they are something worth, for thus they be pregnant of thee, fruits of much grief they are, emblems of more, when a tear falls, that thou fallest which it bore. So thou and I are nothing then, when on a diverse shore. Now, if we look at these lines, this is the first stanza of the poem. There are 9 lines in the poem. Let's have a look at the rhyme scheme of the poem. The first line ends with the word forth. Second line ends with here. The third with beer. So first is A, second will be B. Here and beer rhyme together, so it is B, B. Then worth and fourth line rhymes with the first one, so the rhyme scheme of the first 4 lines will be A, B, B, A. Fifth line is B and then D, so this is C, C. Then mo, bo and shore, so this is D, D, D. A, B, B, A, C, C, D, D, D. So this will be the rhyme scheme of the stanza of a valediction of weeping. Of all the stanzas of a valediction of weeping, there are 3 stanzas in the poem. Each stanza consists of 9 lines. The rhyme scheme of the poem is A, B, B, A, C, C, D, D, D. We just discussed it in detail. In the poem, the poet uses the imagery of money and cartographer and moon. Cartographer is a person who makes the maps, that how skillfully, how artistically he puts on those images of the countries on the ball, which is blank before that, and it becomes a globe later on. So he uses the imagery of money, of map maker and moon also. Otherwise the poem is not very difficult. It is a very simple poem in which the poet, in which the speaker addresses his beloved, and he uses imagery. Basically he wants to leave, and he asks his beloved not to weep. He uses imagery to reinforce the idea. Let's begin with the first stanza. Let me pour forth my tears before thy face, whilst I stay here. So the poet, the speaker intends to take leave from the beloved, and he says that till the time I am staying here, let me pour forth, let me throw some tears on your face. He says that let me cry in front of you, let me weep in front of you, for thy face coins them. Coins them here, that that when I will weep, the tears that I will shed those tears will get the importance like the coins that through your face, because in those tears your face will be reflected, and thy stamp they bear, and by this mintage they are something worth. He says that since when I will cry in front of you, your image will be reflected in those tears, and it would give them importance like that of currency, and because of that stamp of your face in those tears, it will have an importance or significance worth money. So because of the reflection of your face in my tears, it will give them, that will be stamped in my tears, it will give them significance, it will give them importance because of that stamp on it. It will give them significance like that of money. For thus they be, so they will be pregnant of thee, so they will be full of you. So because since your face will be reflected in those tears, so they will contain your image in them. Fruits of much grief they are, emblems of more. So he says that these griefs, they are a symbol of my grief, they are the result of my inner grief and my sadness. When a tear falls, that thou fallest which it bore. So whenever a tear falls, that means you fall, because you are in that. Those tears, they embody you, you are present in them. So you, each time a tear falls from my eye, you fall in that. So thou and I are nothing then, when on a diver's shore. So he says that I and you are nothing after that, because we will not remain, because when on a diver's shore, that there will be such a flood of tears that we won't remain there, we cannot stand there. So he compares his tears. He says that when the tears are there, since I will cry in front of you, so because of grief of leaving you, those tears will have your reflection in it, and they will, because of your reflection, because of your image in it, they will gain the currency, they will gain the significance of that of money, of that of coins. So when each time when a tear falls, each time you fall in that, and I, after that, after having them fallen, you and I are nothing. He says that on a round ball. So he says that a workman that hath copies by can lay an Europe, Africa and Asia, and quickly make that which was nothing all. Now he gives the second metaphor of the map maker. He says that on the round ball, first there is a round ball. He is referring to the globe here. He says that first it is the round ball. So that person works very hard and he copies, he engraves those continents on the ball, and finally that becomes a globe, which was nothing all. So earlier it was nothing, it was a round ball, it was a flat ball. एक गेंद की सूरत और बेशुमार गेंदें होती हैं, जब ग्लोब बन जाता है तो इसकी सिग्निफिकेंस बढ़ जाती है. Now this is the second metaphor that he has used here. So doth each tear, he makes it, he compares it with the tears now. So doth each tear, that when that ball which was nothing and it was made a globe by the handwork of the man who engraved or who copied those continents on it, it became a globe. So he said that so doth each tear, that every time when your image is engraved in my tears, every time it happens, which thee doth wear, that you are wearing a globe, ye world, by that impression grow, till thy tears mixed with mine do overflow, this world by waters sent from thee, my heaven dissolved so. So he says that when since he is going to leave, so the beloved is also sorrowful, the beloved is also sad, and he says that a globe ye world, by that impression grow. So by that impression, even that world and the globe that grows, till that tears mixed with mine, that both the tears of the beloved and the speaker, both they combine together and they bring in a flood, do overflow. They overflow so much, they overflow this world by wet waters sent from thee. So they overflow so much that they are so much of the tears that it causes a flood. My heaven dissolved, so it brings a destruction. It becomes the cause of the downfall of his world. So his world will be drowned. He says that by those tears that are combined together with his beloved's tears, he says that it will bring a downfall, it will bring a destruction of my world. Oh, more than moon. Now this is the third metaphor here. He says that more than the moon, draw not up seas to drown me in thy sphere. पानी चांद के साथ जो पानी का जो कशिश है, now he is referring it to that. He says that कि जिस तरह से चांद की वजह से जो पानी है उसकी सतह चढ़ जाती है, पानी की सी में पानी का फ्लो जो है वो ज़्यादा हो जाता है, to drown me in thy sphere. So he is comparing this with the tears of the beloved. He says that जिस तरह से पानी समंदर में जो है वो चांद की वजह से पानी की सतह चढ़ जाती है, इसी तरीके से मैं जो है वो स्पीकर कह रहे हैं कि ड्राउन मी इन दाई सफेयर, कि मैं उस सफेयर में डूब जाऊंगा. वीप मी नॉट डेड, दैट डू नॉट वीप, डू नॉट क्राई, और एल्स आई विल डाई इन दाइन आर्म्स, आई विल डाई इन योर आर्म्स, एंड फोरबियर टू टीच द सी what it may do too soon, and he will bear and he wants to teach the sea what it will do soon. So this is the third image of the moon, because of the level of water, because the level of water is disturbed, it changes with the moon. It usually rises during the first 14 days of the date of moon. So he says that in the same way it drowns me, your tears, they will drown me in your field. Let not the wind example find to do me more harm than it purposeth. Since thou and I sigh one another's breath, whoever sighs most is cruelest and hastes the other's death. He says that let us decide, let us not others find any example of this sort, that we to do me more harm than it purposeth, that let's not do harm to each other, let's not bring me harm. He says that since you and I, he says that we are two bodies and one soul. He says that we, each one of us sigh each other's breath, because since we have got the same spirit, as we have discussed earlier also, that for John Donne, for him the doctrine of love or the treatment of love was different. He believed in two bodies and one soul. So here it is the same representation. He says that you and I, we are two bodies, we are apart, but we are close also because our breath is same. And he says that whoever sighs most is cruelest, that whosoever is going to, either I or you, whosoever sighs more, whosoever weeps more, will be the cruelest, will be cruel enough and hastes the other's death. And that person who is more sad, more sorrowful, will cause the death of the other person also, because they are one soul in two bodies. So he has represented the idea of two bodies in and one soul, that since they are one soul, so whosoever will, even if one of them weeps more, because of those tears, because those tears, they will bring destruction. So because of those tears, he says that it will cause the death of both. He says that it's not that you cry more and because of your tears I will be drowned. He says that because of those more tears I will die, and since you are a part of me, you are also going to die. So in this way, it will bring death to both of them. We come to know his different treatment of love, his different treatment of two people who are in love. If we have a review of lecture 24, in today's lecture we discussed the sun rising, in which the speaker, the poet, addressed the sun, and he said that why, what do you think, you are so powerful that with your rays you are disturbing us here in our bedroom through the curtains and through the windows. He then says that he then asks the sun to go and to talk to the people who have to do the hard work, who have to get up early in the morning, to go, who have to go to some offices or schools, to go and to ask them to start their work and do not disturb them. Then he says that I have the ability to eclipse your rays, but I do not intend to do so because I do not want to lose the sight of my beloved. Then he represents the microcosm of the earth. He says that this room represents the whole world, and since you are old and you do not have that energy and spirit to shine and to warm all over the earth, all over the world, so you can do your duty by shining on us, by giving us warmth, because this room represents the whole world. In a valediction of weeping, we see that the speaker in the poem addresses his beloved, and he first says that let me weep in front of you so that my ears, that they gain the significance, they gain the currency of money. And later on he asks, he bids his beloved not to weep, and there are a number of images also used in this poem. First of that of money, secondly he uses the image of a globe and a globe maker. Then he uses the image of moon, that since because of the moon the water level increases, he asks his beloved not to weep, because if his tears combine with his beloved's tear, if they bring forth a flood, they both will be drowned. He says that it's not that he will be drowned in the, only he will be drowned in the tears, in the flood of the tears of his beloved, since they are one soul in two bodies. So these tears collectively will cause the death of both the speaker and his beloved, both, because they both are, if one cries or one weeps more, that person will cause the death of the other person also, and even that person himself or herself would not survive. The one who would sigh more, that will cause the death of both of them. In the so today we have discussed the sun rising and a valediction of weeping, and in these poems, and in the earlier lecture we discussed Go and Catch a Falling Star and Love's Alchemy. In all these four poems, these are very short poems, short simple poems, and the language of these poems is not very difficult. The lines are not very long. Sometimes the poet uses irregular patterns in order to convey certain specific meanings. And something very notable we found in, or we discussed in these four poems, the use of conceits. बहुत सारे मेटाफर्स हमें इसमें नजर आए हैं. मेटाफर्स के थ्रू द पोएट यूजेस इमेजरी. उसने इमेजरी इस तरह की यूज की है, और वो मेटाफर्स ऐसे हैं कि वो आम मेटाफर्स नहीं है, या हमें उसमें अपेरेंटली कोई सिमिलैरिटी नजर नहीं आती. जैसे चांद के साथ जो है उसके टीयर्स को कंपेयर किया, और वो टीयर्स का कंपैरिजन कैसा है कि क्योंकि चांद की वजह से समंदर में पानी की सतह बुलंद हो जाती है, तो उसको टीयर से कंपेयर कर दिया है. सिमिलरली ही कंपेयर्ड द मैप मेकिंग. नाउ ग्लोब को किस तरीके से बॉल को जो है उसमें ग्लोब में कन्वर्ट किया जाता है, उसका कंपैरिजन दिया है. देन द टीयर्स, उसने रिफ्लेक्शंस यूज किए हैं कि किस तरीके से टीयर्स उसमें रिफ्लेक्ट होते हैं, और उसके में बिलवेड और जो स्पीकर है वो दोनों उसमें नजर आते हैं. सो ऑल दीज आर द factors that make these poems metaphysical poems. Then in Love's Alchemy we talked about elixir, we talked about the alchemist, because the poet wanted to know, to discover the hidden mystery of love. The basic idea of the poem revolved around the theme that true love does not exist in this world. Similarly, in the other poem, Go and Catch a Falling Star, once again the poet asked the reader to do a number of impossible tasks, to carry out an impossible task, to find out the true, to find out a faithful and sincere woman in this world, which in his times was thought to be an impossible task. So all these poems, they are noteworthy, they are notable for their comparisons, for the use of comparisons, for the use of metaphysical characteristics. The poems are short, but they are compressed with, full हैं किस चीज से, comparisons के साथ. हर लाइन में poet एक नया metaphor, एक नया conceit use करता है in order to make us understand the imagery, in order to make us understand the situation, कि हमें पता चले, और उसको आम लाइफ से, उसको different field से compare कर रहा है, सिर्फ एक field से नहीं, literature या emotions या feelings की बात नहीं कर रहा है, उसको different तरीके से present करने की कोशिश की जा रही है. So this is the reason it is known as metaphysical poetry. So all these characteristics collectively make it metaphysical poetry. लेकिन उसमें जो dominance है वो conceits की है, वो comparisons की है. उसमें उसने कई बार contrasts use किए हैं and at times comparisons use किए हैं. और ऐसी चीज़ों के comparisons जैसे map maker का है, अब map maker का और globe का tears और beloved के साथ, now this is something unconventional, something extraordinary. Ordinarily we cannot think of such comparisons. Similarly, there are other comparisons also कि जिसके बारे में आम तौर पर हम नहीं सोच सकते. So this is the beauty of these poems. So this is the characteristic feature that make it metaphysical poetry. In the next lecture, we shall discuss the holy sonnets, because John Donne is not famous only as a metaphysical poet. His poetry had different aspects. He wrote love songs, he wrote holy sonnets also. So these holy sonnets, they are more religious in their nature. In the next lecture, we shall discuss some of his holy sonnets. Allah Hafiz.